Starmer makes catastrophic move in Friday disaster with his remake at the Paris meeting as spark immediate Firestone. A diplomatic earthquake shook Paris last Friday as Prime Minister Keir Starmer's bold gambit at the coalition of the willing summit sparked fury, raising urgent questions. Has Europe's new strategy to counter Russia's war in Ukraine just become its greatest liability? Or is this the moment that finally breaks Moscow's grip? But before we continue, subscribe to our channel to be the first to receive latest new update anytime we drop a new one. So what did Starmer say? Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron's joint leadership of the Paris summit aimed to project European resolve. But beneath the rhetoric, fractures emerged. While the UK and France rallied 31 nations to tighten sanctions and plan a post-ceasefire security force, the absence of unified messaging with the US left observers wondering if Europe was undermining or preparing for the failure of Trump's peace efforts. The UK PM doubled down on hardline tactics, declaring Russia was filibustering peace talks and demanding tougher sanctions to force concessions. Yet critics argue this risks alienating Moscow further, with one EU diplomat privately admitting, "We're walking a tightrope. Pressure without progress could push Putin deeper into isolation." Over 200 military planners in London mapped out a reassurance force involving air, sea, and land deployments. A move Starmer insists is for the day after a deal. But analysts warn such preparations could be perceived as preemptive escalation. Are we building a safety net or tripwire? Asks Dr. Sarah Rain, a defense strategist at Chatham House. Volodymyr Zelensky. Sanctions must bite until Russia stops this war. Europe's unity is our lifeline. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, we cannot let fatigue set in. Ukraine's future hinges on our resolve. Starmer's coalition risks becoming a parallel track to US diplomacy, a recipe for confusion. In London's Parliament Square, protesters held signs reading "Sanctions now, ceasefire later, and don't let Putin win." Retiree Margaret Jenkins, 68, reflected the mood. "I support Ukraine, but I fear we're playing with fire. What if Russia walks away entirely?" As Europe's coalition charts a path independent of US diplomacy, the stakes grow higher. Will Starmer's strategy force Russia to the negotiating table, or fracture the West's fragile unity? The answer may lie in Moscow's next move. Starmer's push for maximum sanctions has sparked fears of unintended consequences. Germany's Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, warned that cutting off Russian energy exports could cripple Europe's manufacturing sector, while Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, demanded exemptions for southern European nations reliant on Russian gas. Meanwhile, the UK's own energy crisis looms, with analysts predicting a 15% rise in household bills if sanctions disrupt global markets. "We're gambling with the livelihoods of our citizens," said a senior Labour MP who wished to remain anonymous. The White House's silence on the Paris summit has fueled speculation about transatlantic tensions. While Biden's administration has not publicly criticized Starmer's coalition, insiders suggest frustration over Europe's unilateral moves. "We're not coordinating on sanctions or military planning," a State Department official admitted. This risked creating two competing strategies, one for Europe, one for America. Meanwhile, Trump's camp seized on the divide, with a spokesperson declaring, "Weak leaders like Starmer are undermining real diplomacy." Back in Westminster, Starmer faces mounting pressure from his own party. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has privately urged caution, warning that sanctions could deepen Britain's cost-of-living crisis. On the streets, anti-war activists clashed with pro-Ukraine protesters outside Downing Street, chanting "Stop the sanctions, start the talks," as police intervened. Amid the chaos, a YouGov poll revealed a nation divided. 48% support Starmer's hardline stance, while 42% fear it risks escalation. "The PM is playing high-stakes poker," said Professor Tim Bale of Queen Mary University. But what happens if he loses? As Europe's coalition charts a path independent of US diplomacy, the stakes grow higher. Will Starmer's strategy force Russia to the negotiating table, or fracture the West's fragile unity? The answer may lie in Moscow's next move.